Welcome in everyone to a very special episode of American Joyride. I'm joined today by Rob Peters. He is a former submarine commander, and he is the first person from the Navy who is not a Navy SEAL to join the show, which is why I am so unbelievably excited for this nice change of pace. Rob, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, let's just not waste any time and jump right into it. How did you find yourself in the world of the submarines in the United States Navy?
Yeah, well, that's a good one. I was a student at Washington State University back in the early 1990s, and I had walked on to the Navy ROTC program. I was not really interested in submarines at the time. I was just like most people, young men of my generation. The movie Top Gun kind of sucked us towards the Navy. It's like, oh, I'm going to go fly. And then I realized at the time my vision was really terrible. I was like, oh, those dreams got crushed pretty quickly. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I enjoyed Navy ROTC my freshman year, and then I was encouraged to apply for a scholarship. And I was one of the fortunate ones. I had good grades, and I was encouraged to change my major. I started off in economics, and then I moved on to a different degree program, more technical. And yeah, I had to do these summer training cruises. Like Army ROTC, for example, they do like summer camps or something like that, and then the Navy ROTC, we have to do these summer training sessions or cruises. And going into my senior year, I had to pick something. And the previous summer, I'd done a cruise where it was like 1 month long, where they expose you to surface warfare, aviation, submarines, the Marine Corps, and the big four. And the submarines one was really interesting. And little did I know, the submarine I ended up writing, the USS Georgia, 27 years after I wrote it, just as an overnight guest, I was going to be the captain of. Different story. But at the time, I was like, oh, they're all cool. The surface ship it wasn't really, I don't know, it just didn't strike me as professional. And nothing against the good men and women who drive our surface ships. They're an outstanding force. But from in 1992, the sales pitch was not sticking with me. And so fast forward a year later, summer 1993, and I did a midshipman cruise on a submarine, and we like shot 2 test missiles and did a bunch of cool stuff. And I was like, this is my tribe. These people have their act together. I feel safe with these people. I can trust my life to them. They're competent. They're squared away. These are the people I want to be associated with. So that fall, I volunteered for nuclear power interviews. So there's basically an initial selection process. If you're an officer candidate applying, you have to go do a series of interviews, and you go to Washington D.C. to the headquarters for naval reactors, and you interview. You do a couple technical interviews, and then you do a final interview, always with the admiral that's in charge. So there's this 4-star admiral in charge of the program, and all candidates have to interview with him. And so I did, and it's not the most confidence-inspiring interview, we'll just say, but for reasons I still don't know, I got accepted. And so I graduated from college in May of 1994, and then I went to Orlando, Florida for nuclear power training. And so basically, I went through a training pipeline. It took me from the summer of 1994 to the end of 1995, various locations, and then I showed up to my first submarine in January of 1996. So that's basically how I ended up in the submarine force, and it was quite a ride.
Well, that's actually a great timeline point because it makes me think of
Yeah.
something. We're a few years removed at that point from the fall of the
Mhm.
Berlin War. The Soviet Union has been dissolved. So, what was the main role? Had anything changed by 96, or was it pretty much the same mission set that you would have seen in the Cold War?
Yeah, great question. I think at the time with the Cold War drawdown, we were starting to see, we talk about the peace dividend, from the winning the Cold War. And through the decade in the 1990s, we started seeing a drawdown, if you recall, across the DoD, Department of Defense. And, the Navy was no exception. And I think from a Navy submarine force standpoint, going into it, my first submarine was a ballistic missile submarine, so our job continued. We continued maintaining the deterrent mission. That really didn't change much. I know on the other side of the submarine force, the attack submarine force, the work they used to do in the Cold War, the volume of it definitely was less. And so, submarines were still deploying. We were getting rid of a lot of submarines and decommissioning them. I guess I would, getting rid of is probably a more generic term, but, the formal term is decommissioning. And part of the peace dividend, we had to make some, financial choices. At the time, I really, I'm on my first tour, very tactical, not really tuned to what's going on there. But that's what was going on. So we were drawing down the submarine force and the Navy. We went from a peak number. I don't remember what the number of the entire fleet was when I joined the Navy, but we definitely drew down. And part of that was, we won the Cold War. So from a national perspective, the nation made a conscious choice to save money, and we did. And so, but to answer your question, to circle back, yeah, our mission didn't change on my first submarine.
And that's a great segue. And I'm sure a lot of people watching this right now maybe think all submarines are the same or don't realize
Yeah,
that there's different types of submarines. I
yeah.
know that when we kind of talked to each other the first time, I was very intrigued by the differences. So, can you explain the different types, the different classes, and what
Sure.
role, pros, cons of you get with each of the three?
Absolutely. So there's in the United States Navy today, there are three types of submarines. So there are ballistic missile submarines, guided missile submarines, and attack submarines. And so I'll go in reverse order. So attack submarines form the bulk of our fleet, and they're generally smaller. They're around, just under 400 feet in length, and they displace, mid six, 6,000, 7,000 tons in general. And there's several classes of them. There's a Los Angeles class, which is the Cold War vestige submarine, was the workhorse of the fleet through to the end of the Cold War. And they're still around, but they're being decommissioned as they're aging out. And then we have Seawolf class attack submarines. There's three of them. They were built for a continuation, basically, of the Cold War. Definitely to go up against high-end Soviet submarines. But because of the peace dividend, that class of submarine was cut short at three, and so there's only three in existence. And then we have the Virginia class attack submarine, which is becoming the workhorse of the submarine force today. They were built for a post-Cold War environment. They're smaller, they're slower, but they're very quiet. And all three classes are quiet, but that's and their predominant mission is, like they said, fast attack submarine. They go after, they do intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or ISR. They do strike, anti-submarine warfare. They go after surface ships, anti-surface warfare. They can do subsea warfare. They're multi-mission platform. The one thing they can't do is strategic deterrence, which I'll get to. The second class is the guided missile submarine. So think of the attack submarine, except it's basically we took a missile submarine, took all nuclear roles off of it. So anything associated with its strategic deterrence mission, we took the first four ships of the Ohio class ballistic missile submarine. We took them into overhaul instead of decommissioning them as part of a nuclear treaty, which basically was going to reduce the number of submarines we had out there anyways, because we count, from not to go too far in this rabbit hole, but for treaty purposes, we count the number of launchers or the number of tubes that can hold missiles. So we were going to go ahead and had to make a choice as a nation, what we're going to reduce. So, we made a decision that we're going to take the first four Ohio class submarines, originally 18 ship class. We're going to go down to 14. We're either going to decommission them or repurpose them. And as a nation, we made a decision to repurpose them, and we ended up decommissioning more attack submarines. So there was a trade that was made in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Anyways, the guided missile submarine is basically an attack submarine. So it's a converted ballistic missile submarine. It's basically an attack submarine in a much bigger hull. And its primary mission is strike. Think Tomahawk cruise missile strike, and also special operating forces or SOF type missions. And then it can still do the other traditional missions that I described for the attack submarine. And then, last but not least, you have the Ohio class ballistic missile submarine, originally 18 ship class. And again, the first four were repurposed and refueled. And today they carry over 70% of the nation's, strategic deterrence. So basically think weapons and warheads. In the United States, and this will be a good segue into something I think you and I will be talking about in terms of adversaries. But in our country, the United States, we have what we call a nuclear triad. So when we talk about deterrence with nuclear weapons, we have a land-based component, an air-based component, and a sea-based component. And so in our country, the triad is, those three things. The submarine force forms the entire sea-based component of that. And if you add up all the warheads between the three legs, air, land, and sea, 70% of the deployed warheads right now are carried aboard Navy submarines. So they're really important, and they're being replaced by the Columbia class ballistic missile submarine, which is the lead ship is under construction right now. In fact, the second ship, the Wisconsin, I see in the background there, it is being built also. So, yeah, we have 14 of them, and all of them have been refueled, and they continue to carry the bulk of our deterrent. So those are the three classes of submarines we carry. They're all nuclear powered, so they basically have a nuclear reactor on board as a heat source to produce steam.
Can you explain to the audience, and this is going to lead us into the strategic deterrence,
Yeah,
but explain to
yeah,
the audience why the nuclear triad is so important and why you
yeah,
can't just have ICBMs and silos, or you just can't have planes. Why do you
yeah.
need all three?
Yeah, great question. So the United States, we made a choice back in the Cold War to diversify our capability to defend ourselves. So the primary goal of strategic deterrence is, the word deter. Deter our adversaries from nuclear attack on us, a devastating attack against us. So the calculus is, formed on a school of thought called mutually assured destruction. This is back from the Cold War, Soviets versus the United States. And so we started off, at the end of World War II with just bombers. And, as we got smarter in developing rocket technology, we went to intercontinental ballistic missiles. And then we figured out a way to miniaturize a land-based missile, put it on a submarine, and actually make it work so it can launch from underwater, which was a very revolutionary thing in its own right. And so by having all three legs, we have the flexibility as a nation to deter against our adversaries across all kinds of different scenarios. So I'll pose it to you one way is, if you want something, you want to be able to dial up, it's kind of that's my word, not anybody else's. But if you want to strike immediately, the president can direct shooting, ICBMs because they're already ready to go and they're in just ground-based silos ready to go. Aircraft, after the end of the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War, the first President Bush basically ordered alert bombers to be stood down. So we no longer have bombers ready to go and take off. Some of your viewers, you may not know that back during the Cold War, we kept an alert posture. Initially, after in the 50s, going into the 60s, we actually kept aircraft flying around all the time with nuclear weapons, and then we actually stood down from that posture and kept them on what we call ground alert. And then so the air component is visible. So from a political tool, by having a visible deterrent, that's very helpful. And an aircraft provides, while it's not instant in its response, it provides a visible deterrent to our allies and for the United States. And then last but not least, the unseen leg of the triad, which is the submarine. The submarine with nuclear power makes that platform very, very hard to find. And, the fact that, the only thing that limits us is food by the man crew, we can go for months on end and stay underwater, and our adversaries have no idea where we're at. And so basically, for entire life of myself, you, and many others, as an American citizen, you can rest assured that there's been at least a submarine in each of our major oceans continuously on patrol, ready to go since, the late 1950s. And that's been happening very quietly, and we don't really, talk about it too much, but our adversaries know they're out there. And so that's basically the three legs. The reason we have three is the President of the United States needs to have the options to defend us should deterrence fail. And there's no way our adversaries are going to get to us because we have three different three different legs and ways to deter our adversaries. And that's a challenge right now, with the People's Republic of China, which I think, we're going to get to and talk about, and happy to. So that forms basically an answer, gives viewers and yourself an idea of why we have three legs, and we can extend that discussion with China.
And the idea is you need what I believe is the term secured second strike, where if they get two of three, no matter what, you're still going to be able, to your point, if they get every plane and every one in a silo, then the submarines
Mhm.
can open up on them. In theory, if they got all the submarines, which would seem impossible, you've got the
Correct.
ones in the silos and the planes. And
Correct.
that leads us to what we're talking about right now on a broader scale, which
Yeah.
will then lead us to China, Russia, strategic deterrence. Is
Mhm.
the idea that as long as those submarines, the ballistic missile class submarines, are in the water,
Mhm.
nobody would be dumb enough to ever launch an attack against the United States? Is that the thinking? Because they know that they're guaranteed to get hit in response.
Yeah, I mean, we basically are out there. We're a big stick. A lot of people say, oh, an aircraft carrier or the 82nd Airborne or the Marines or whatever. Those are the visible conventional forces. But at the end of the day, all that, in my opinion, is underwritten by the strategic deterrent. The sheer presence of a ballistic missile submarine hidden away, ready to go all the time, round the clock, 24/7, 365, gives our opponents pause. And that is our nation's insurance policy from my perspective. And having lived it, I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt that if ever tasked to do the job, we would do it.
If can you give us an example? Because you were talking about if strategic deterrence were to fail a couple minutes
Hmm.
ago, we were talking about the triad. What would an
Hmm.
example of of that actually failing, and has that ever happened in real life with the U.S.?
No, fortunately, an example of deterrence failing, again, this is an example is, we suddenly out of the blue get attacked by, China or Russia, with incoming missiles. That would be in the industry, we call that a bolt out of the blue attack. And, that's highly, highly unlikely. I think historically, we can look back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that probably was the closest time in known history, with nuclear weapons, where the United States was close to deterrence failing. Uh, but I think from a dated my entire career, deterrence um, was not an issue.
So let me ask you this, and let me frame it a shade differently. There's a lot of people
Hmm.
out there who, I believe the Code Pink protesters, they hate nuclear weapons. They want to get rid of all nukes. If
Hmm.
the United States today got rid of its ballistic missiles and the submarines and
Hmm.
any nukes elsewhere,
Hmm.
how quickly would we open ourselves up to an attack?
Well, I don't know if we'd open our, that's a good question. I don't know how we would open ourselves up to an attack, but I think from a broader national security perspective, not having nuclear weapons would definitely embolden our adversaries. Think North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, to just to name a few, would be more emboldened on the world stage to compel the United States into behaviors that we don't want to do. And so nuclear weapons always provides that backstop for our national policy. So when we talk about, having an aircraft carrier, strike group, or some forces overseas forward deployed, sure, they're in harm's way, but from an escalatory standpoint, there's only so much an adversary will want to do against us because of the nuclear weapons. If we didn't have them, I think that would put the United States in a dangerous position. Again, that's my opinion. I think from a disarmament standpoint, there's been a push within our government for decades to lead the way in disarmament. So there's a school of thought of unilateral disarmament, which, in my opinion, again, in my opinion, has been a complete failure. Every time the United States, has gone down or stopped making nuclear weapons or gone down in number of weapons we have, our adversaries continue to modernize, make new weapons. And, for the longest time, for example, the Soviet Union/Russian Federation openly violated the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. There's been no goodwill in my adult lifetime by China or Russia or North Korea or Iran to basically put a halt to their nuclear programs. If anything, we have, if you look, and this is publicly available stuff, you look at the Nuclear Posture Review, you look at various publicly released reports that, the government has put out. We've been reducing our number of warheads for years. In fact, the last time we built, a nuclear weapon was like 1988. Just put that in perspective.
Yeah.
So the fact that we as a nation have unilaterally led the world in disarmament, there's a narrative out there that we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. Going back to your point, and my counter to them, to people who protest that was, with due respect, we have tried that road. We have tried the road of unilateral disarmament, and it's been a complete failure, in my opinion, from a policy standpoint. And so now, we're faced with a new challenge on the global stage, where we have China emerging, and they have been emerging, and we've just been sitting here eating popcorn on the side of the road and allowing this to happen. And my concern is that from a deterrence standpoint, how much is deterrence? That's the $64,000 question, as they say, is how much is deterrence? Is it one nuclear weapon? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Who knows? That's a great separate discussion. I'm not a policy person to discuss that. I have my opinions, but I think in order to meet our needs as a nation to achieve in the president's national strategy, we have to still have nuclear weapons. And personally, I have an interest in it because, I exist today because of, nuclear weapons. And I'll share this with you. My dad was a World War II vet. He was a Seabee. He fought in the Pacific. And my mom, who happened to be Japanese, was born near Hiroshima, and she survived the bombing of Hiroshima. And my dad was, in the invasion of Okinawa, and he was told, hey, the next stop's going to be mainland Japan, and a lot of you are going to not come home, expect to fight to the death. And, if it wasn't for the bomb, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, my dad would have never met my mom, and I wouldn't be around. So, my counter argument, I argue from a personal position, but I also argue mainly from a national position. There are a lot of people's lives that were changed. It's unfortunate we had to resort to that from a historical standpoint, but I think we understood as a nation after World War II the importance of nuclear weapons. But at the same time, we need to be good stewards, and we have tried, as a nation, in very, very generous ways, over the decades, to try to, in good faith, reduce the number of nuclear weapons we have on Earth. So I think the people who demand getting rid of all of them are delusional. They're not realists. They're not grounded in the reality of the world. And that while all of us want to get rid of nuclear weapons, heck, as a military professional, I don't think there's a competent military operator out there that wouldn't want peace. All of us want to never have to shoot a weapon in anger. And so, if we never have to do that, then I think we're doing a good job. And but that's my argument. It's a two-pronged argument. Mainly, it's you're crazy to get rid of them because everyone else continues to build them. And frankly, it saved lives in the end. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people inconveniently discard history and realize that a lot of American lives would have been lost if we would have invaded mainland Japan to end World War II, because the Japanese were going to fight, and they were willing to fight, to take more losses, which drove the calculus.
I agree with you 100%. And I'm glad you brought up the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's incredible that your dad and your mother had direct ties to that situation. Small. See, you never know what you're going to learn on this podcast. You always learn something new.
Yeah.
I want to get in now to Russia, China. I think that many people view China as the biggest threat to the United States, our biggest adversary in the world. Russia kind of probably in that 2 spot. What is your, as a experienced submarine commander who did this for decades, what is your assessment of the Chinese and Russian navies in their submarine fleets, and which one should concern us more?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think they're both on equal footing in terms of overall threat to the United States. Russia has way less submarines than China does, but I would say that their operators are more trained, have more reps and sets. Their submarine force is older. They're skilled mariners. They're definitely formidable. And set aside the Ukraine war, Russia's been quietly building and modernizing their submarine force and associated weapon systems. So I think a lot of people don't talk about that. You and I don't see that in the mainstream media. So I as a professional recovering submariner, I would say that we've always held a healthy respect for our Russian friends. The Chinese are different in that they're building a very big navy. A preponderance of their submarine force is non-nuclear in terms of nuclear power. A small amount is nuclear power. And kind of going back to the previous question you asked about the importance of a triad, I think the Chinese recognize that too. And they have, in my opinion, global ambitions. And, preponderance of their nuclear deterrent force is ICBMs. So they have land-based missiles, which constitutes the preponderance of their nuclear assets. Um, they have several Jin class ballistic missile submarines. However, they're in the process of modernizing and building a next class, and they have cracked the code also, and they have you know submarines that perform similar undersea deterrent missions that we do. So they're clearly building towards a triad or triad-like strategic deterrent model. So it's very clear to me that, excuse me, if our adversaries are in this case, the PRC is willing to do that, then they clearly see the advantages of having, more than just a monad or one leg and how survivable that is. So that is not lost on us as a nation. It's very clear to me. I think a lot of people, when we talk PRC, United States, the topic usually hovers around Taiwan. This necessarily isn't what I'm talking about is not Taiwan per se directly. I think it's the greater, preservation of the Chinese Communist Party. They want to preserve their state the way it is, and the way to do it is through deterrence. And that's clearly the direction they're going, as evidenced by, what's available in the public. You and I can Google this stuff and it's out there. Yeah, a friend of mine, Tom Schugert, he's a big thinker and into strategy and talks often about this. He's been on Fox News, I think, and CNN, some other outlets. He does some great analysis on the People's Republic of China and their capabilities. But yeah, those are the two big, nations out there. And from a submarine perspective, I think there is something to be said about having a lot of submarines, not necessarily higher capable sailors like the Russians, but they're out there and they're continuing to modernize and try to get better. And the part of the world they operate in is very congested. It's a tough environment to operate in. Our submarines have operated there for decades, and it doesn't make it easier, by the way. That's in fact where that part of the world, the Western Pacific, is one of the toughest parts of the world to operate a submarine in. And so that adds the complexity, from my perspective.
I've got to ask because I interviewed some pilots not that long ago, and they talked
Mhm.
about what they would think of a direct air-to-air engagement with the Chinese or the Russians or whoever it might be. In
Yeah.
your professional expert opinion, if there was a direct naval engagement
Mhm.
between Chinese subs and American subs, and let's say surface ships, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
who's going to come out on top?
Well, it depends. I would say us. And when I say it depends on the type of encounter, right? So, anti-submarine warfare, I think a lot of people think it's just a submarine going against a submarine. That's not always the case. I think, a lot of people don't realize this, but anti-submarine warfare doesn't mean it's just sub on sub. It could be aircraft, it could be surface ships employed working with submarines. I think we bring a lot more training capability and understanding to the fight, and our operators are trained better. And I think we would fare on the winning side of that. However, I caution that with it all depends on what you show up to the fight with. So I would say I'm still, I'm still convinced that we have an edge. But if we don't continue to stay on top of things, we don't continue to train, we don't continue to invest in the training, the technology, the platforms, and the capabilities, that edge is going to erode. And that's my concern, when we talk about defense budgets, is where are we investing our deterrent capability as the United States? It's not just strategic deterrence, but it's also conventional deterrence. How do we as a nation send the message to Xi that today's not the day, dude? You know, and to do that, we have as a nation, we have to make some decisions on how we do that. And I think, we've invested rightfully so in the undersea domain, and we need to continue to do that because I think, the submarine warfare is provides the United States an edge. We call that, in a lot of respects, an asymmetric edge, and it gives the president options that would not be on the table if we didn't have our platforms.
So if I put you in charge right now, would you advocate for building more submarines or improving the ones we already have to counter China? What would be the best way to go about making sure that they're never on equal footing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's just set aside all the variables, the politics, the money, the federal budget. King for a day question. Those are always awesome. Unconstrained environment. Yeah, I'd build more submarines and modernize the ones I have, and see if I could extend the life of them. The problem we've had as a nation is because of history and the timing of the history. We drew down from the Cold War, so our submarine numbers dropped, predominantly attack submarines. And then, we entered an age where the other part that I didn't talk about, the unintended consequence of the peace dividend was we drew down the number of shipyards that could build nuclear powered submarines. It turns out, fun fact, nuclear powered submarines require a little more detailed work in order to produce them and to operate safely at sea. So, there's a couple extra steps in the building process that, we need to do to make sure those little guys go out to sea and are safe. And so that requires more money because, frankly, getting in the nuclear club is a pretty expensive club, but it's an exquisite technology, and to have that is a strategic edge for our country. So we've made those decisions. But yeah, I would definitely invest in more submarines. But the big thing that I would also invest in is not just that. You can't just produce capability overnight. We need to rejuvenate our public shipyards and our private shipyards. We've lost a lot of them, and we're only down to a handful. And we need to reinvigorate our industrial base. That would be something I would put a lot more investment into if I was, given the purse strings to do that. I think that's something that's often not discussed in the public forum is the Navy's need to have a robust industrial capability to build not just submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, frigates. If we're going to have a Navy that's viable for power projection around the world, you've got to have an industrial base to back it. And for years we as a nation made a conscious choice to spend our money elsewhere, and that has now, the birds have come to roost, as they say, or whatever the saying is. But basically, we're now in the process of playing catch up. So that's ultimately more submarines. We're pushing for that. The Navy continues to do that, which is awesome. I fully support that, and getting our industrial base rejuvenated, and it creates more jobs, frankly, in America. And I think that's good. We need to definitely continue to do that.
I agree with you. And I think that I'm so glad you made that point. I think the industrial base not being maybe what it should be is a huge national security threat that nobody seems in the mainstream media to talk about much. One of my favorite stats ever was at the height of World War II, the U.S. was rolling one B-17 bomber off an assembly line per hour. So that per hour. So when things are rolling, the ability of the United States to produce weapons and tools is unlike anything I think the average person can imagine. So great point. 100% agree.
Yeah.
I would now want to get into when we first talked, you were talking about the autonomy that a submarine has that nobody else in the military has, and that you could go a month without speaking to the outside world potentially. Could you talk about when you talk about this unrestricted autonomy compared to other people in the military? Explain to the audience kind of what that means and why it works that way.
Yeah, so one of the loneliest jobs in the world is command at sea. So basically being captain of a ship. You think the deepest, what is it, whatever the fishing show is, anyone who's been a captain of a ship, everything's the buck stops with that person. There's no one else to look to in the seafaring world when the shit hits the fan, basically. And so, everyone looks to the captain. So the captain is, usually things are running fine and everything works, and the captain can be a benevolent monarch. But when the shit hits the fan, everyone turns to the one guy to make or gal to make the decision. And so being the captain of ship's one thing. But I would say what makes a submarine captain even more lucrative of a job, and the reason I chose to stay in the Navy and go command submarines is because, I get to do things in autonomy. The nation has placed trust in me and other folks who've, had the privilege of being a captain of a submarine at sea, you know, to basically go periods of time without communicating with their boss. They're just given intent and commander's intent and orders. We go out, we execute those orders, and we don't report because we're given tremendous amount of discretion. And then we come home and we then fill out all our paperwork and tell the world, our bosses, what we did, and we move on. And there's not many jobs on Earth. I'm pretty sure there's only a handful, and nuclear submarine captain happens to be one of them in the United States, where a captain of a submarine is given tremendous authority and accountability that comes with it, and to do their job without being riddled with communications. And that attracted me very much to my job because with the trust comes a tremendous accountability, but if you're not up for that game, then don't sign up for it. That's what I tell people. I like being able to operate autonomously, given direction, give me intent, trust me and my crew to do our jobs. My job, when I was a captain of a submarine, I was 100% responsible from bow to stern, everyone on board, for their training, well-being, and combat readiness. And I liked having that responsibility and accountability. So that's something that I think if you talk to anybody else that did that job, they would probably tell you the same thing. That's one of the perks of the job. And it's not like you're getting emailed. So if you work in an office or something, you always have a manager or somebody coming and asking you how things are going. Yeah, you don't always have that in a submarine because you're underwater and you can't communicate with folks on shore.
And I have two questions on that point about
Yeah.
not being able to communicate with people on shore. First off, I
Hmm.
want to take this back to when the pandemic started in
Hmm.
2020. In
Hmm.
theory, would it have been possible that we would have had submarines that were kind of in that dark zone that had no idea what was going up on the surface, the country shutting
Yeah.
down and all that stuff? Could something like that occur?
Nah, probably not. And the thing is, we can on a submarine I can't speak for any other submarine force, but on a U.S. submarine when we're at sea, we still get messages and traffic sent to us, so we can copy and bring in information. We choose consciously not to transmit because that gives up our
Gotcha.
stealth, right? So we get ideas. The captain of a submarine, he or she, they get information on what's going on around the world because that helps formulate, that's the other thing, right? If the nation's going to trust, knuckleheads like me to go do this, they also owe it to us to let us know what the geopolitical situation is, what's going on. So, when we're tasked to do things on behalf of the nation, we as commanders with autonomy can frame the solution correctly. So for example, if I'm going to get tasked to launch, Tomahawk cruise missiles at somebody, it's nice to understand the geopolitical context under which we're doing it. There's not a commander out there that's not going to get told, why we're doing that. Because I need to understand that as a commander, so I understand. Because as a commissioned officer, I was responsible for upholding the law. That's the oath I took, and so part of it is I need to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and that's the beauty of being in America, in our free society. That's our military personnel are given tremendous responsibility and authority and autonomy to make those decisions. And so that culture is already there. It's good having that. And yeah.
And then this will lead me to my second question about kind of the autonomy and being not speaking to people for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
But your regular soldier, he gets a card that says rules of engagement when he deploys to Iraq. It says,
Hmm.
here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. If
Hmm.
you're in the middle of the ocean and a Chinese submarine or a Russian submarine maybe is posing as a threat, you start to think as the
Hmm.
commander of the sub, we might have a problem.
Hmm.
Is it your call to engage, or do you have to wait on someone back in the U.S. to
Hmm.
tell you to engage?
Yeah, so, as a not to go too far into this, but all commanders in the absence. So when you talked about ROE cards specifically for soldiers in Iraq, for example, those are issued during combat operations. So I want to distinguish between non-combat operation and combat operation. So if we're actually engaged in a government sanctioned offensive operation, I'll just use that as an example. There will be specific rules of engagement for all our forces. And it varies with time. It changes often depending on, a lot of factors. But if you're just out, let's say it's the years, 2005, you're in the middle of, or 1995, you're in the middle of the ocean, we have a default set of rules of engagement. For example, you know, you can't just go out and, go get your face punched and not punch back. We'll
Right.
just say hypothetically, right? So we're given some standing rules of engagement for all U.S. forces. And I would say every nation has, some sort of standing rules of engagement. Their commanders are always, given something. That's of course is the $1 million question is, when you're out operating out in, the middle of nowhere and you're operating like, for example, in the Gulf, there's ships, there's all kinds of foreign warships all over the Gulf because there are many nations that have civilian vessels that go through and traffic, through that part of the world. So that I would say most industrialized nations deploy their navies to that part of the world to show protection for their interests, if that makes sense. And so they have rules too. Of course, the mystery is what are their rules? And so when you're operating in a complex space with a bunch of other actors, do you know their rules? Do they know our rules? And that's as far as I'll go into it. We always have some kind of rules of engagement.
When we talked, we also talked about on just not just the autonomy, but how life command at sea. It's a totally different kind of beast, whether it's a
Mhm.
submarine or it's an aircraft carrier, whatever it might be. When you say that it's a totally different kind of job, is it just the autonomy that makes it a different kind of job, or are there other aspects to it as well that make it a unique situation to be in?
Yeah, good question. So part of it is I don't have one of the pictures I sent you was a pretty telling one. It shows a bunch of sailors in line going from some tugboat looking thing with a brow across it and hand over hand passing stuff. So, the way submarines resupply is we don't have another ship that pulls up alongside us, shoots a line gun over and just, like aircraft carriers, seen videos of underway replenishment where big crates and pallets of things are coming from one ship to another. That's all fantasy. That doesn't exist in submarines. We have to hand over hand all our stuff. So, and there's only so many parts you can carry for repair on a submarine. And so if you're a couple thousand miles in the middle of the ocean and something breaks, you're not going to have the luxury to just phone a friend and instantly get parts. So we have to make decisions at sea to operate certain ways, and we may not tell people back home that we're operating, hurt. And in fact, we're expected. The nation demands our captains and our leaders, enlisted and officer, to think outside the box and come up with solutions. And so that's what we do. We're given the folks that and the unsung heroes of all this are the great men and women who engineer our submarines. They are the best at what they do, and they build world-class products that are very redundant. And so, we can easily fight with things broken and continue as if nothing, ever happened. And really, it's a testament to the engineering. And that's another reason why our ships cost so much is you're paying for that engineering, you're paying for that margin, because there's nothing more reassuring than, in the middle of the ocean, something's broke. I have backup methods, or I have, highly reliable parts available, so my sailors can come up and, with a solution and fix stuff. And that's a testament really to the, working to the left of the problem. And, if you cut corners, our adversaries, for reasons, you'd have to ask them. My opinion would be, I think in some cases they cut corners, and they've had, more accidents or incidents at sea with their ships, not just submarines, but ships, because they accept lesser quality product, or they don't understand what good engineering looks like. Whereas I think we have learned the hard way that there is no compromise for high technical standards. But yeah, that's, for me, that to get back to your, to put a circle back on your question is, I like the fact that as a captain of submarine, submariners are autonomous creatures to start with, and we like to solve problems and get the job done. And I think that sets us apart. We like to get the job done. I think sailors in general do, but I think what sets us apart from other sailors is we do it in a confined environment, away from home for months on end, in an undersea environment, and every person on board that submarine is expected to do their job. Everybody has to know a little bit of each other's job. And so, yeah, there is a little more higher caliber sailor that we recruit and, assess and select. And so, it's the job really comes down to trusting my life to my crew, and my crew trusting their life to me. And that trust up and down, that bond that's formed from serving aboard a submarine is one of the greatest things. That's what I enjoyed as a commander of a submarine. I knew, regardless where we were in the world, that my team has my back, I have their back.
And I've always heard that submarine crews are generally way tighter than a surface ship because there's not as many people. Again,
Mm-hmm.
you're in a very confined space, you're deep
Mm-hmm.
underwater. And on that note, I'm just curious, and I'm very excited to ask these next couple questions. What
Yeah.
is the living experience like on a submarine? Like, tell me about the food. What type of
Yeah.
food are you guys eating?
Yeah, the food we're eating's probably not good for you, but man, it tastes good. I would say out of all the food in the Navy, it's probably the best food. That's the one thing that a sailor has to look forward to after standing watch is at least have a decent meal. One of the things that I think is at a premium on board a submarine is privacy. The average sailor has to sleep in a rack, which is about a coffin size. And basically, the rack curtain in which they have to open to get in and get out is really the scope of their privacy. So your only privacy on board a submarine is when you're in your rack. Otherwise, there is none. And then add to it, on a lot of our submarines, our attack submarines specifically, a lot of our sailors have to hot rack. So what that means is when one sailor is on watch, there's another sailor occupying that rack and asleep. And so that one rack is not for one person, it's actually for two people. And so that adds an element to the reduction in privacy. And so that adds to the environment. We're used to it as submariners, but I think, a person who's uninitiated into that may not know that. And the living spaces are frankly far more tighter than on, conventional ships that operate on the surface. Fun story. We did a port visit when I was in command of an SSGN, and we shared a pier with a destroyer. And so we were allowing crew members from the destroyer to come tour our submarine, and vice versa. Our crew members were touring the destroyer. All my sailors that went and toured, I talked to, are like, "Man, this thing's huge," and a lot of the berthing areas for the sailors on the destroyer were humongous compared to, what we had. Or, for example, the captain. For example, the captain is the only person on a submarine that doesn't have a roommate. So I was captain of a submarine twice. The second time around, I've been in, 27 years, and I'm the only one on board that doesn't have a roommate. And my space is tiny. And then when I go over to the destroyer, and the commanding officer, he has two staterooms. He has an import and an at-sea cabin. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And this thing's huge. I mean, he's got a full out freaking bed. And it's like mine folds down. It's the same size as my crew for the most part. It just, instead of a coffin, it actually folds down from the wall down to parallel, and I can sleep in it. So, okay, I don't have an overhead that I can smack my head on. So I'm the only one on board with that luxury. Somebody's written somewhere, the privileges in light of his responsibilities are few. So that basically is living on board. In terms of a submarine, the food, that's the other one too, is your viewers may not know this, but on Navy ships, there's different types of messing areas, or places where people eat. So unlike the Army or the Marine Corps, there's tradition behind this, but sailors, depending on their rank, eat in different areas, typically on ships, aircraft carriers. But on submarines, you either eat in the crew's mess if you're enlisted, or in the officers, you eat in the wardroom, but the food is cooked is exactly the same. So there's only one place on a submarine where the food's made, and everybody eats the same food. So the feedback on the quality of the food is very quick, and it gets my attention, it gets the crew's attention. And so there's a lot of feedback that quickly goes back to the good people who prepare the food. And so we all share in the same food, we all share the same air. It's pretty much, there's a lot less, there's a lot less emphasis on rank in the
That's I was
submarine
I was
in
going to
the in
ask
the
that.
submarine
Yeah.
force. Yeah, because frankly, you ask a submariner, I'd give two shits less about your rank. Everyone knows who the captain is. Everyone knows who the chief of the boat is, equivalent to a command sergeant major. Uh, you know, everybody knows it's not as rigid. I think that what separates a submarine force from the rest of the Navy is what we view as important is not what the rest of the Navy views important in terms of day to day. The formality of rank and all that stuff, that's great. But when it comes down to it, I need people to have integrity, do their jobs, show up to work on time, and have a good attitude, right? Those things matter to me far more than your ability to recognize that someone's an E3 or an E5. I could, and on a submarine, I think, knowledge is power. And I think a crew member that is more qualified and able to do more jobs competently is held in much higher regard than the same person who is of a higher pay grade that maybe qualified less, if that makes sense.
It does.
So, your usefulness or utility on board, and I think a lot of submariners call it usefulness, but I think your overall professional, your reputation plus your professional standing and integrity together, that matters more than anything else other than rank. So when you add in the confined spaces, the monotony of watch standing, the tight quarters, everyone eats the same food, we breathe the same air, it creates an environment where everybody has a job. On a surface ship, if a fire happens, there are actual people dedicated to go fight the fire. That's their day job. And they go plug holes and leaks, and they go fight fires. And other people they go to their battle stations or whatever, and they just stay out of the way. Whereas on a submarine, everybody goes to the fire, that's not on watch. And, we have an organization to respond to it, but everybody has to be a firefighter. Everybody has to be able to stop flooding. Everybody have, so that everybody has multiple jobs in the submarine, whether it's the captain all the way to the lowest ranking person. We all have different roles. And so when you add that in, you can't accept having substandard people, serving on board submarines. You got to have people who are willing to take on a lot of responsibility, regardless of their rank, their age. None of us care about that. We want people who can get the job done.
I got to ask because you brought it up. And I guess maybe I don't understand quite. So if you're on an aircraft carrier, the food
Mhm.
situation, it sounds like the quality of food could be very dependent on your rank and where you eat. But on a submarine, everyone eats the same thing. So is that
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think it's dependent on who cooks the food, and the
gotcha?
leadership. I think it's every ship. I would that's outside my ballpark. What I do know for a fact is there are different messing areas on board aircraft carriers. So, for example, the captain can eat in his own place where the officers eat in a different place and there's different wardrooms. The crew eats in multiple places throughout the aircraft carrier because it's such a large ship and there's 5,000 people. The chiefs or E7s and above eat in their own mess. So there's different places on board an aircraft carrier, for example, that sailors eat. And, and that's all a function of, the leadership of the cooks and their professional, skills. Um, and that situation that you described could happen where some people may end up getting better food than other people just by who cooks where. That our numbers on a submarine are much smaller. We only have a handful of cooks. You know who they are, so it makes the leadership problem a lot simpler in many respects, in terms of training and holding to account, the quality of the food.
What would you do to raise morale or to kind of uplift spirits if things weren't going well, especially because it's such a tight knit group? Did you have
Mhm.
some go to tricks?
Oh, they're tricks. I think, morale it's the organization takes on the personality of the person running it, especially in military type structures. So I think from my own personal observation, I think, morale often rode with, a combination of what the crew's feeling kind of overall with, coupled with, how I presented myself and conducted myself. And I was in command for 5 years and during those on two different submarines. And I think when things weren't going the way we needed to, I think it starts at the top. There's no trick to it, to be blunt, but it starts with the person who ultimately is accountable. That's me. And so, when something goes wrong, I need to, get my house in order first. I'm not going to go out and we're not going to go out and blast other people. It's not the team's failure. It's my failure. Number one. And so I need to first address, why did I allow my crew to get to this point? And that's the ownership part of it. And morale starts, with me. It doesn't start with other people. It starts with me. And I need to make sure that, I bounce back first and highest when things go wrong, because that's what I get paid to do. And I would expect any captain of a submarine or ship, frankly, to be that person when something goes wrong. And, you have to do that first. And when you do that first, you know, and get things in order and get things going and get direction given to right the ship per se, that's the first step. And I think, and in other things, there's obviously the going around and talking to your people. I found exceptional value in just walking around the ship, just talking with my crew, knowing your people, building rapport, establishing trust. It's a two-way street. I don't expect them to just blindly trust me when I first come into the job. I have to earn their trust. That's a very big, I truly believe that's integral to being a good leader, is you have to earn the trust of your people. They need to know you're a person. They need to know that you have ups and downs, but at the same time, we're all in it together. So, I wouldn't say there's a one size fits all, or there's a perpetual bag of go-to type things. I think it depends on each situation. Not the most satisfying answer in the world, but I will say the thing that's constant all the time is it starts with the head of the organization. So it always started with me. I needed to make sure my morale was in check, that I was good to go and had my shit together before I walked out of my stateroom and started interacting and making decisions. And I expected that of my officers and chiefs also. Now that was a blunt discussion I had with them, is, hey, when you walk out of your space and you go out and interact with your sailors, what attitude are you conveying? What I need to be able to explain to them what we're doing, but they also need to be able to explain, to the troops what's happening. So it's a team effort. But yeah, without the commander of the outfit, setting the tone for that, yeah, we're not going anywhere.
This is the last question I have kind of on just the lifestyle of a submarine, and then we're going to get into some of
Yeah,
your personal stories. I
yeah,
like watching movies. I like watching TV shows, and I've seen enough involving Navy ships. And there's always like the brig or the Navy police or whatever. But on a
yeah,
submarine, do you even have space for something like that? Like, what do you do if you have a legitimate problem
yeah.
on the submarine with an individual?
Yeah, you got to get creative. There's a handful of spaces on, depending on the class of submarine, where, you keep watch on people. We don't have a brig. You're absolutely correct. And so depending on the nature of the issue and what from a legal standpoint is being done or from a safety standpoint is being done to keep someone safe, that varies. I'll give an example. Someone may say they're suicidal and we have to keep a 24/7 watch on an individual. So there's only a handful of spaces on board a submarine where I can keep a 24/7 watch with enough people to keep an eye on that individual where it's actually sustainable until I can get that person off, for example. Again, that's an example. Um, yeah, so we improvise and we just pick spaces. Typically, think chief's quarters or wardroom or somewhere where there's a space. We have to balance impact of the ship's training schedule, ship's operations, whatnot, and in the number of sailors. Typically, it's just onesies. How we manage that, but submarine sailors throughout history have gotten creative on how to manage that. I mean, you look at World War II, how we were handling prisoners of war. And or if we have to render aid to someone in on the high sea, we have to surface and go, render assistance to someone who's in distress. How do we bring them on board and take care of them? We have to find a place for them to live. There may be language barriers, etc. Submarines have actually had to do that before. We're bound to provide aid to those on the high in distress on the high seas. Also, we're not exempt from that.
I now want to get into you told me some cool stories when we first talked, and I'm going to start with the one that made the most international news, and that is the story of you pulling through the Strait of Hormuz. I
Mhm.
can't wait for you to share this with the audience. Can you tell us
Yeah,
what went down? What was the purpose of it? What was the goal?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, there we were. It was the fall of 2020, and I was on the USS Georgia. We're deployed to Middle East, and we got tasked to, hey, we want you to, we're thinking of pulling you in for a port visit to Bahrain. And if you look at the map, you're out in the Indian Ocean. Bahrain, that's in the Arabian Gulf. That means we have to go straight to Hormuz. And basically we were tasked to, hey, we like you to do that on the surface. I'm like, okay, well that's a unique, different mission. So that's something we normally don't do. So there's a lot of other, you know, things that we have to plan for because submarines aren't designed to just run around on the surface. We normally just get underwater and go. Um, so we also had to interact with a lot of other people. So there's a lot of planning that went into this. So my team was pretty excited about it because it was different. And so, I kind of let my team know, hey, this is the tasking. What do you guys think? Here's some homework to go do. Go figure out who the last person is that did it, and whatnot. And they came up with a great plan, and so we executed it. And so I think it was like December 20th or something like that, 2020 or something like that. Yeah, we, you know, came up and we had a couple escorts and we went through the Strait of Hormuz, and there were some pictures and the Navy had some folks standing by to take pictures of us going through, and yeah, we went through, surprised the crap out of the Iranians, and we went right on through, no issues per se, and the weather was pretty supportive, although it was starting to get a little chilly. I never realized that that part of the world gets chilly, in the winter. I'd never been there and up in the Gulf until then. I somehow managed to not go there my entire career until then. But yeah, we went through, and I get to Bahrain a couple days later, and I pull some traffic because we just weren't really talking to anybody. And I get some notes from some colleagues back home. They're like, "Hey, did you check the news?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And a couple of my crew was also getting messages from home and stuff. Hey, you have checked the news? And apparently, yeah, we made the news. And there's a bunch of news outlets that covered us going through the Strait of Hormuz in a quote show of force or something. So there's a picture of like a cruiser in front of us, or just us alone. There's one with a helicopter and stuff like that. And and I think a lot of folks, at least from what I read in the reports, are like, show of force. And what we didn't know at the time was, I guess there was an attack before we went through by Iranian proxies against a forward operating base or some kind of operating post or something in Iraq. the couple days before or day before. We had no idea about that. And so the timing of our visit, which was planned, was impeccable. A lot of times I think we just do things as a country, and it just happens to time out pretty well. And so that was kind of funny after the fact, that it's like, oh wow, So I mean, we knew it was going to be a show of force regardless of world events, but the fact that it came on top of something that had just happened a day or two before was pretty incredible. And needless to say, on the way back out, yeah, they kind of knew we were there, so we had a little different reception from our friends on the way out. So that made for a fun leaving the Gulf.
What
But
do
yeah,
you
all in
mean
all, that
when you say that they gave you a different reception on the way out? What do you mean by that?
well, I mean, they knew we went in, so they knew we were going to go out. So, they tasked us to go back out the same way we came in. That was what my bosses told me to do. Said, Roger that. So we had a plan, and we already had, figured that out. And they knew we were out there. So they weren't caught off guard. So they brought more, we'll just say hosts and receptionists to say hi to us. So, you know, they're out there doing their thing. We do our thing, they do our thing, and what they, and yeah, it was a little more entertaining on the way out because we were expecting it and we got it, and dealing with them is dealing with them. We've been doing this as a nation for decades, and so highly professional interactions, and they were safe. I wouldn't say they were unsafe, and you know we made it out and we continued doing business and we moved on.
I want to talk about the first time you ever went out as the captain. This is the first time you're leaving in
Yeah,
control of an entire submarine and all the lives that are on that submarine and taking ownership for mistakes.
yeah,
Walk me through what it's like to be in that position for the first time ever.
yeah. So funny story. So we always start off on the surface next to the pier. And I remember, when I was a junior officer, you know, um, before we get the ship underway, I'd let the captain know that, hey, Captain, the ship's ready to get underway. I intend to get the ship underway. And usually he would acknowledge me and, very well. And, I always look back and talk to him or look next to him and just let him know I'm doing it. And then we get underway and get going. Well, fast forward a decade and a half. Now I'm the captain, and my officer deck looks at me and says, I intend to get the ship underway. And I just, you know, I agreed with him, said very well. He's doing all that good stuff. And I just instinctively looked behind me because for years I did that. And I looked behind, there's no one behind me. And then it hit me. I'm like, oh, hey, yeah, I guess that's me. And so that was kind of funny. At the time I was like, wow, I hope nobody noticed that. And so that was the first experience. Words can't really describe it. It was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool moment. I think you really feel command the first time you make a mistake, and that's where in my opinion, you feel the burden of command. A person a lot smarter than me once told me the problems of command are a privilege, and it's true. And when you live it, and when things don't go, and things will always not go the way they're supposed to, but the first time you have a big problem and you have to go figure it out, that's when you start realizing, oh, that's what I get paid to do. Yeah, my job is to unscrew this, and it starts with unscrewing me. Yeah, so that's a different experience, but it's very humbling, brings you right back to earth, and then you have to have some hard internal dialogue and get yourself straight. And it goes back to that morale question you asked. It's all the same. It's just different classes of problems, but they all kind of intersect. Problems are problems.
Did it live up to the expectations? A question I always ask guys who go to combat, they get in their first
Mhm.
gunfight, whatever it might be. I say, did it live up to what you thought it would be? Was it disappointing? Was it more exciting? For you, that first
Mhm.
time you're in command, you're the captain of a
Mhm.
submarine. Did it
Mhm.
meet expectations, exceed expectations?
Mhm. I think you exceeded them. I had worked hard to do that, and I think anybody else that's done, what I did would probably say the same thing. It's it is great to be able to do that job, and it's you're calling the shots, as they say. And to me, I was trained by some exceptional people before me, and I felt I was well prepared for it, and I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was more than I expected. Good and not always good, but every day in command is above average, and just some days are less above average than others. You're not going to always have everything go perfectly, but yeah.
When you look at your time as a captain of a submarine,
Mhm.
what's one setback or challenge that you had to meet head on that you overcame that you're really proud
Yeah.
of how you handled it?
Yeah, yeah. So we had an issue when we were at sea where we were doing some training, and basically a piece of electrical gear had smoked, we'll just say, and that made us stop training, of course, and we had to go figure out why this box full of electrical wires had smoked, but it took down a major system on board the ship, which allowed us the primary means to keep us on depth out in ocean. So basically, a hydraulic system. And this electrical fault required to troubleshoot it required us to have to shift to a backup means. And we're in the middle of the ocean. I mean, we're talking middle of freaking nowhere. And my team scrambled around the problem, and we had to figure out how we're going to fix this because we had no idea what was causing it. The symptom was this electrical box that provided power to a pump had smoked. Why did it do that? Well, it's not as easy as, oh, it's something in the box. What caused it to do that? So it took a day or so between the people who work on the electrical stuff and the people who work on the mechanical stuff round the clock, excuse me, to figure out what was going on. And so we figured it out. We figured it out as a mechanical problem. And there was something going on in the hydraulic plant which was causing this pump to overheat. And every time the pump would overheat, the electrical box, think of like your circuit, your power strip at home. When it gets an overcurrent condition or a power surge, it trips off, right? It just kills the power. Well, the same thing was happening with this pump. There was some kind of excessive resistance that was going on in the fluid system that was causing this pump to overheat, which would trip off the controller. And it just kept doing this over and over and over, and we had no idea what was going on, and that's what caused the thing to smoke. Anyways, then we had to take down this entire hydraulic plant down to basically, parade rest, or in civilian terms, basically take it apart and figure out what's causing it. And it took another day or so to do that. But watching my team work round the clock, and this was on their off watch time. So these sailors are standing watch, still doing their day jobs. And, they relentlessly worked round the clock to figure it out. And it turned out it was like a little spring, or it was this little piece of metal that got stuck in a pipe. This little piece of this 30-cent part or whatever was causing all this chaos to go on. And I remember seeing the team with the aha moment, and the fact that they had chased that down, and they knew what was at stake. We were running around in a condition that was safe, just not preferred. We were not as redundant or redundant as we needed to be to operate. With something we wouldn't want to operate for let me rephrase, we wouldn't want to operate that way for a long period of time if we didn't have to. We could have operated forever that way, but just that's not our industry standard. That is not what we expect, in the industry, as we say. So, the industrial expectation is you're going to fix it. So we did. And, to me, that was a proud dad moment, to see the crew. I truly believe our young men and women join the military. They want to make a difference. And if you want to make a difference, I think people rise to the occasion when things go wrong. In this case, it was pretty significant. And to watch the team, swarm the problem with no direction, just did it. And, my job as a leader is to give them the tools and the time and space to make it happen. They know what's at stake. I don't have to tell them that. They're smart young men, and they did it, and super proud of them. And that to me was overcoming something that had definitely long-term impact if we wouldn't have fixed it. That same underway, we also had another issue as hydraulics again. It's funny, hydraulics are pretty finicky. Anybody that works on them can tell you that. But yeah, we had another one where we had a very interesting leak where we had to go replace a giant O-ring, and under less than optimal conditions. And a similar team got together and swarmed the problem and fixed it pretty quickly. Again, another proud dad moment, and they did a great job. So, to me, those kind of things illustrate the best in America. When I think of our service members, and I've seen a lot of the stories that you've interviewed combat veterans, and being exposed to adverse situations. I think watching people react to adverse situations when they're in the middle of nowhere. They know the answer. They revert to their training, and they do their jobs without question, and do it relentlessly. It gives me the confidence that I know if we do, go in the harm's way, that we're going to be fine. I would offer to your viewers that, submarines, because of our unique capabilities, there's not much difference between peacetime and wartime. I would say rules of engagement really is the line. And that's about it, because we operate, out in the ocean. And so, we're faced with challenges and risks all the time. Whether we want it or not. And our job as leaders is to manage it and make smart decisions about it.
I love it. I love the fact that you talk about swarming a problem and how they just attacked it and got it figured out. This is one of the subjects now that I can't wait to get into, and it's the women on submarines. It seems like there's
Hmm.
always a debate that pops up every once in a while about
Hmm.
what roles should women have in the military, what jobs should they not be allowed to do.
Yeah.
Submarines and is a unique one in the sense that generally historically it's only men, and now that's
Hmm.
kind of changing. What are your
Hmm.
thoughts on women entering the submarine fleets?
I think it's fine. That's and we've been doing this for over 10 years, by the way. We actually implemented this around 2009. It was a quiet rollout, and we did it. We first brought women in, officers only, onto crews. And then once we got, you have to sustain a career field, right? So when you bring a new demographic into a career field that only had a certain demographic the entire time, you got to provide a structure that at least promotes advancement opportunities and rotation opportunities. So it's a complicated corporate problem, right? We have made, as a nation, made a conscious decision to bring women into combat roles. And so submarines is no exception. So, we were tasked to do it. We swarmed the problem as a corporation. We came up with a plan and we executed it. And, I was fortunate. I was probably one of the few officers in the submarine force that has been in command and has commanded all three different types of crews. I commanded an all-male crew. I commanded a male crew with female officers, and commanded a crew that had fully integrated enlisted and officers. So I've done all three, and I can tell you with absolute confidence that it's a non-issue. You bring a new demographic in, you introduce, the problems are the same. People are people. Some of the flavors of the problems are different, but other than that, I think women, just like men who volunteer to serve their country, want to make a difference and want to challenge and want to feel like they're doing something with purpose with their lives. And I really enjoyed that. I think the women that we recruited and brought into the submarine force are outstanding. And they have, just like the guys, I would say in a lot of cases, they made the guys raise their game. And until, as a submarine force, we started bringing more and more women in, and integrated more and more submarines. At first there were only a handful of submarines, and then over time we started building it up. I mean, we recently commissioned a submarine, the USS New Jersey, which was built from the ground up to be fully integrated. So that was a first.
So when you
And
say when you say it's built up to be fully integrated, that would seem to
mhm.
imply what, different living quarters, different showers.
Yeah, or it was a submarine that was built to account for male and female crew members. So we did have to retrofit submarines that were built prior to New Jersey with some accommodations. Whether you either physically have to make some changes, or you have to change policy, right? It's either a physical solution or a policy solution when you deal with people, right? And usually the answer is it's a blend of both. And but from a policy standpoint, there wasn't that many policy changes that we had to do. It turned out we had to dust off our books and actually, I remember when we were going through this game, early for me, it was in 2012 going to 2013, as we're trying to figure out leadership team, how are we going to bring women officers on board. We had to go back to our own history and go back to our own standards of conduct, all male crews. And the answer was right before us. The answer was enforce the rules that are already in place. So, for example, when you leave a berthing area, you have to have PT shorts on, flip-flops, and a t-shirt as a minimum. It turned out that's always been the rule. It's just as a submarine force, we weren't, over time, we had not enforced it uniformly, if you get my drift. So
Hmm.
guys leaving bunk rooms, sometimes with one or more things missing from that three-piece kit. And, so part of the education with the crew is, hey guys, the rules have always been the rules. We're gonna start following them and applying them again uniformly to everybody. So really, the issue, there was really no issue. It was just a matter of going back to our roots, going back to the things that make us submariners, and that played a big role in, success. I think you will see, like with any time you bring a new demographic into any population, you're going to see problems. And there were problems. We had a few bumps along the road. Um, but, before it was, single actor guy causing a problem or a guy on guy issue. Well, now you have guy on girl on girl issue, whatever, however you want to bin it. To me, they're all the same. They're people problems. And, you deal with people and it's through leadership. I really liked in the end how we ended up implementing it. And, I think it changed, I think, as a submarine force, our baseline culture. I think bringing women in did change it. It's different now than it was, the submarine force I joined back in the early 90s. I'm not here to say it's better or worse. It's just different. And, we have adjusted as a society. I think we have adjusted as a submarine force and we've moved on. To me, it's a non-event.
Has there been a submarine yet with a female captain? And if not, is that an inevitable outcome?
Yeah, good question. We're probably about, I would say 2 years or so away from having our first female captain. So, our initial cohort of officers that we recruited, female officers we recruited in, the ones that stayed in and managed to, through their own merit, make it up the ranks. We've had a couple executive officers of submarines already that are ladies. So they're, and I think a couple of them already screened for command. So assuming they make it through you know, the training and assessment and selection process for that, I expect, to have our first female commanding officer of a submarine in the next 2 years.
I like to hear that. The reason I wanted to
Yeah.
ask that question so much is because I ask a lot of the Army operators who have
Hmm.
females in their organizations doing a variety of different
Hmm.
roles, and they all love them. They have nothing but the highest praise for them. But that
Yeah.
always is something that people outside the military who maybe have a stereotypical view
Yeah.
struggle. There's a lot of people, for whatever reason, their brain can't
Yeah.
be wrapped
Yeah.
around it. I've never understood that, but that's
Yeah.
why I think your comments are very neat.
Yeah.
When it comes to taking risks and having your people's backs, I know we
Mhm.
talked about that as well. How important is it for you as a leader that your people know, push come to shove, the guy at the top of the food chain here, I know he has my back?
Yeah, it goes, great question. It goes back to, I think, as a captain, as a leader, you have to earn the respect and earn the trust, more importantly, of the people that you're, privileged to represent and work with. That's really important. And, it's everything. It starts from your daily actions. I always tell people who are aspiring to be in positions of military leadership that, hey man, and you live in a glass house. Don't think for a minute that you're not being watched all the time. I mean, you are. And so the way you carry yourself, the way you wear a uniform, the way you cut your hair, the way you maintain cleanliness standards of your quarters, the way you carry yourself, all those things matter. And I think that builds the day-to-day behavior and the way you conduct yourself. Are you fair? Are you consistent? Do you demand a lot out of yourself as a leader? All those things carry over, and those I would argue are daily investments into building the confidence as a leader. I think anybody aspiring to be in a leadership role should consciously think about that and how they carry themselves. And just assume you're under watch and be true to yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Don't bullshit. People can see through that. Be who you are. You're going to have your weaknesses. You're going to have your strengths. You need to be able to, shore up your weaknesses with people who don't have those weaknesses, and at the same time, continue to strive to shore them up within yourself. You're either, I agree with David Goggins's notion that you're either getting better or getting worse. You never stay the same. I agree with that. And, as a leader, you got to push yourself, and that starts at the top.
I agree at 1,000%.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, a big thing that is in the news for anyone who pays attention to military news and it even just mainstream news is recruiting numbers
Mhm.
are significantly appear to be a problem in every branch other than the Marine Corps. I believe the Marine Corps was the only
Yeah.
one in the last cycle that met its recruiting goal number.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's no simple answer to why recruiting is down, but in your
Yeah.
professional opinion, why do you think the military is struggling so much to get new members, and
Mhm.
what could be done to turn it around?
That's a great question. Everything I'm about to say is, Rob Peters' opinion. I think that attracting this generation to meaningful purpose and selling the message that, military service is honorable, meaningful, and actually, is beneficial to the country. But in the end, as a result of being, doing service for the country in that order, those benefit to you. I think selling that story is has been challenging. And I think the political environment does not help. I think people who say a bunch of shit, who are in elected office, who sit there and go, "Oh, the military's woke" and all this bullshit, it's just causing chaff and noise in the problem. I think the real thing is incumbent upon people who are in uniform right now to tell their story. I think we need to do a better job of outreach back to our communities and sell, our story. Every sailor, airman, marine, guardian, coast guardsman has a story. And I think it's important that we afford our young men and women who are doing great work today to go back and sell the story back home, because I think it's clouded by a lot of chaff out on the interwebs. You know, that said, I'll neck down specifically to the submarine force. I don't know our recruiting numbers. I've been out now, and I'm not privy to those numbers. But I would say as a submarine force, we strive to maintain the standard. The standard's unnegotiable. So at the end of the day, we're still recruiting people of higher caliber, and we want to retain people who, the default is you're high caliber. Well, that doesn't mean you're retainable. I years ago, this is like 2007, I was asked to speak to a group of civilian college students who were interested in joining the Navy nuclear propulsion program. And I asked them, "Hey, why are you all in this room?" And they all looked at each other and they gave answers. And the answer really wasn't what I was looking for. I said, "You're all in here because you're smart. However, I don't want to keep you in the Navy just because you're smart. I'm looking to retain people who can make decisions under pressure and win wars. Just remember, you're all being recruited because you're smart. I may not retain you because you're not capable of leading. So if you're not interested in taking the challenge of being a leader, then I don't want you." That doesn't make the recruiter happy, but at the end of the day, I'm in the fleet,
Right.
and at the time I'm XO of a submarine. I don't have time, nor do my chiefs, nor do my, enlisted sailors have the time to deal with substandard people. We need to, recruit people who have their shit together. And so, to me, that's important. So there's this tension. I think it exists in recruiting. And again, I never did recruiting, thank goodness, because I'm probably not the guy you want. Because to me, you want good people, but at the same time, I recognize, there's this throughput that we have to maintain because of an all volunteer force. And that's the price we paid as a nation. That ship set sail after Vietnam. We decided as a nation we're going to end conscription, and we're going down this road. And so, since we've gone down this road, this is the ebb and flow challenge of modern day recruiting. And at the end of the day, I think our leadership needs to do a better job getting our troops out to communities more and selling the story. I truly believe this because I think we have to short circuit a lot of this chaff that's out on the interwebs. I got it. We have elected officials, we need them, but nobody on the elected official side is doing us a service, popping in their opinions about this. I think it's incumbent upon military leadership and to do it.
So that's a very in-depth answer. And like I said, I don't have a clue why the numbers are down. It's not some,
Yeah.
but the one thing I've always, just a thing I've noticed about the Marines, because they did meet the recruiting goal, is
Mhm.
when I'm watching a football game and the ads come on, like the recruiting
Yeah.
commercials come on, it's
Yeah.
like a movie. It's like the Marines have incredible commercials. It's like a bunch of dudes
Yeah.
running through a jungle, shooting
Yeah.
things. And I was
Yeah.
like, that if I was 17 years old
Yeah.
and I thought that was cool, I'd be like, that's awesome. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't.
yeah. The Marine Corps has got the recruiting game locked down. Their message and the thing that I find, I highly respect the Marine Corps for doing, and no other service has been able to ever pull this off except for the Marine Corps, is they're unnegotiable in their standard. Their message is the same. Whether it's we're looking for a few good men back in the day, that message is still there. You want to join us, you're going to join an elite group. You're going to join a bunch of people that, we're not going to back down from our standard. Are you up to the challenge? Yes, no. And, that is their sales proposition. And they do it so masterfully. And so, I always used to laugh at people who worked with recruiting in the Navy. It's like, why aren't you guys taking notes from the Marines? Y'all aren't figuring this out. But also, I would argue in your individual jobs, because, your sailors end up going and talking to their relatives and families and friends back home about their working conditions. I think it's incumbent upon leaders on board aircraft carriers, aircraft squadrons, SEAL teams, submarines, whatever, to make sure that, good leadership carries a long way. It's not just in the workplace. It carries back home to your family, and it does affect recruiting and retention. So I would, commend the Marine Corps for their retention. I would say that has probably a part to do with good leadership.
I got two questions for you left. This has been an awesome interview. I feel like I've learned so much that I never would have had a clue about otherwise when it comes to submarines, leadership as a sub commander. When it comes to the future, when Rob Peters looks at the Navy in 10 years, 20 years, 3 decades from now, if you had to guess, what are a couple big steps and evolutions of the Navy will we see in the coming decades?
I see the Navy in the next, decade, 2 decades, going further from shore. I see that we're already in an era of autonomy. And you talk about drones, you see all kinds of videos and stuff on drones in Ukraine and stuff like that. Make no mistake that the drones can, it just happens, those drones fly in the air. We have drones that fly in the water, and so does everybody else. I think we're going to see the action go further away from shore. And I think a lot of the work is going to be done autonomously. The other thing that's an X factor in all this is AI. Where are we going as a world with AI and military and decision making? How are we going to use and leverage AI to solve today's, the timeless problems? Where's the submarine? Where's the surface ship? Where's the bad guys, new thing or whatever? And I think having AI technology is, that's going to it's already a game changer. But I think once whoever side gets to it first, to use AI the correct, in a better way to reduce the amount of time that a human has to make a decision. Or you could even go as far as saying maybe AI, makes the decision. Ooh, that's a good one. I think Jack Carr just released a book in May that provides a hypothetical situation like that. I think it's what was it, Red something
It's
morning.
red. I think it's Red Dragon something, isn't
Or
it?
yeah, it's a great book. I listened to the audiobook when I was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and that really brings to mind like, wow, you want to talk about which way AI could go. That's a pretty radical direction. It's completely fictitious, of course, and Jack Carr talks about it in his book. But yeah, I see a lot more. I think submarines stay underwater longer. I think, the stealth of the submarine will always be a valid platform and viable platform. I think how it's employed will probably change in the next couple decades just because of the nature of technology. And I think bringing in AI, new weapon systems, autonomous vehicles, I see us as an industry shifting more away from shore.
And this is because you brought it up. You had the opportunity, or by chance, you ran into a Delta Force officer by the name of Todd Opolsky, who the viewers
Yeah.
know because he's been on this show,
Yeah.
while hiking the Pacific Northwest Trail. So, what happens when a Navy submarine commander runs into a Delta Force officer hiking a trail?
Yeah, so Team Blue Green, that started. I ran into Todd, Lolly Lake, Oregon, of all things, and I was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and so yeah, Todd and I hit it off pretty quickly. I think we recognized I think veterans just have a vibe about them, and we can recognize each other from a mile away. I think within 30 seconds of us introducing ourselves and talking to each other, we realized very quickly that we're veterans, and we just got to talking. We hit it off, and you know, just just a good banter. The typical sailor marine dynamic is there. It's just giving each other shit every day, and just good sense of humor, and we operate very similarly from a mindset perspective. When we say we're going to leave camp at 0500, we're out of there, typically before 0500 every day. We're never late. We expect each other to be accountable for ourselves. So our mindsets are the same. We had similar goals to complete the trail. We hiked similar miles every day. Our goal was at least 25 miles every day, and so we had a great time. And just a lot of it is just talking shit. I mean, sailors and Marines are just that's a combination. So we always, Todd and I always used to joke, America and Team Blue Green. And if you get Todd back on, ask him about the crayons I got him. Brand new set of crayons. We pulled in. We were stopped for a couple days, so we went down for trail days, and I happened to be at a restaurant, and they had a basket full of kids stuff, and I saw these packet of crayons. I'm like, oh, fucking grabbed one of the packets of crayons and threw it in his backpack, and it's like, have fun, Todd. He found them. He's like, and he, good on him. He carried those all the way to the border. So, it was good. That's just an example, and you can ask him. He gave me a bunch of grief too. It was good times.
Todd's a hilarious dude. I think he's living out in
Yeah,
Costa Rica,
he
and
is.
I loved interviewing him. It was one of the
Yeah,
funnier, all over the place interviews.
yeah,
Explain the photo of you and Todd with the flag. So is that the
yeah.
final point of the trail?
It is. So we were at the Canadian border. So one thing we decided to do was some point between where we first met and at the end. Once we realized, we're kind of like the two old guys from the Muppet Show, Statler and Waldorf, hanging out on the balcony, just talking shit about ourselves and then making fun of everyone else around us. We decided that, hey, we're Team Blue Green. We're gonna get an American flag. So Todd, at one of the places we stopped, found an American flag. And we made it a point that, when we got to the end, we were going to take a picture, both of us there holding the American flag. And, to show solidarity for veterans and also, the fact that we both honorably served our country and we're proud of our country. And, and that's something that, is undeniable for both of us. And we have a very strong, ties to that. And, so we made it a point to do that. So that was pretty cool. It was a pretty cold. It was snowing that day. It was like snow, hail, rain. It was pretty shitty, but what a great way to end. And
How
yeah, so that's the genesis behind that picture.
how many days did it take you to complete the trail?
Yeah, so I took the leisurely option. It took me like 159 days, something like that. I took like of those 159, I took 30 of them off the trail. We call them 0 days. I hiked 0 miles for 30 days. because one of my goals on the trail was not only hike it, but if I stopped somewhere for a resupply and I liked it or I'd never been there before, like Bend, Oregon, I was going to take a day off. I was going to be a tourist. And I did that. And so there were a lot of places I'd never been to along the Pacific Crest Trail between Mexico and Canada. So I just took time off. There was one day, I think the longest I took was like 4 days, 4 days, 5 days. I had to heal. I had tweaked basically my right foot. And there was no way I was going to continue on unless I let it heal for a little bit. So I had to take a couple days off in, South Lake Tahoe. That's tough, you know, and it was a good time. But yeah, other than that, yeah, 159 days, about, just under 130 days of actual walking.
And you've got all your gear like a tent and your everything with you just in a big bag on your back.
Yeah, you carry everything on your back, That's the fun part about this. When you do a long distance hike, your life becomes pretty simple. It's food, water, distance, and shelter, the big four. And that's every day. And all your worldly possessions you carry. And so when you start making purchase decisions, the prospect of carrying all that crap on your back really starts weighing on you. And the hike taught me some very valuable lessons about what's important in life, and the material things don't matter, it's the people. And the other big thing I achieved was I pretty much deprogrammed from the Navy. In fact, talking to you today is probably the first time in quite some time I've actually had a detailed discussion about my prior occupation. So I was mission successful and deprogrammed into civilian life. Grew out beard, and this is actually shaved down for this, but yeah, I was looking pretty grizzly, and yeah, lost a lot of weight. It was a good time.
Well, Rob, I am so happy you agreed to do this. This has been enlightening. And I do have to give a shout out to Todd because if Todd had not
Yeah,
emailed me, and I didn't find that email until like a month later, going
yeah,
looking for something completely unrelated to it, I'm glad he did because
yeah,
it's just been an awesome interview. It's a really nice change of pace. The
yeah,
audience has learned something completely new.
yeah.
So, Rob, if you want to, can you tell anyone where they could find you if they're interested in following you along with what you do?
Yeah, so I chronicle my hiking stories and outdoor stuff on Instagram. So at bubblehead_hikes, and it's also a channel on YouTube. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm partially retired, enjoying time. Um, but yeah, in all seriousness, to your viewers, if you're looking for you know, um, unconventional leadership advice, and you want to learn a little more about how to manage crises and how to handle things and get things done through people, hit me up on Instagram and just message me, and happy to talk to you. Because there's a lot of good things I learned in my career that may be helpful to you.